Meghan Markle signed a deal in January 2020. It was documented, it was published on the official royal website, and it is still sitting there right now if you want to go read it. The agreement said one thing very clearly: Harry and Meghan would not use their HRH titles, not in public, not commercially, not in any context whatsoever. In return, they walked away with their Duke and Duchess titles, their dignity, and complete freedom to build whatever life they wanted outside the firm. That was the trade. Both parties signed it. The late Queen herself approved it, and for a while, it actually seemed like a clean exit. Then, April 2025 happened. Meghan opened Instagram and posted a letter from Ukraine's vice president, unedited, no caption, no clarification, no note, explaining that the diplomatic address was just a formality, just the full letter, sitting right there on her stories with the words Your Royal Highness visible at the top to millions of followers on a commercial social media platform. And look, I'm not saying a Ukrainian diplomat is supposed to know the terms of a private royal agreement, but Meghan absolutely knew. A source close to Prince William didn't hold back when they spoke to the Daily Beast. The quote was, "You'd have to be an idiot to believe she didn't know exactly what she was doing when she posted that message unedited." And honestly, I think that's fair. You don't accidentally miss two words sitting at the top of a letter you're choosing to post publicly. But that wasn't even the most blatant one. Around the same time, podcast host Jaime King received a personal gift basket from Meghan, addressed using the HRH title, not a letter from a foreign government doing diplomatic courtesy. A personal gift, sent commercially, with the exact title she had agreed in writing never to use in any context. That one is harder to explain away, and I genuinely don't know what the thinking was there. And then there's the Netflix footage. This is the one that really got people talking because it's not a letter, it's not a basket. It's Meghan on camera, on a major streaming platform watched by tens of millions of people. In her own voice, when Mindy Kaling referred to her as Meghan Markle during filming, Meghan stopped her. She said, "It's so funny that you keep saying Meghan Markle. You know I'm Sussex now." A woman who signed a legal agreement not to commercially use her royal identity, correcting a celebrity into using it on Netflix permanently on record. That moment cannot be walked back. It cannot be reframed as someone else's wording or a diplomatic courtesy. That is Meghan, choosing to invoke that identity on a commercial platform after signing a document that explicitly said she wouldn't. Royal expert Kinsey Schofield put it plainly: Harry and Meghan aren't supposed to use their titles for profit, but they obviously do. Privacy expert Trevor Cook went further and suggested the royal family could pursue legal action over the commercial use of a title she had agreed not to use commercially. And lawyers have a term for what that creates: material misrepresentation. The foundational claim on which a commercial arrangement was made turns out to be legally problematic. We'll come back to what that actually means for the money side of things, because the money side of things is where it really gets interesting. In 2020, Netflix signed a reported $100 million deal with Harry and Meghan. The pitch was straightforward: royal access, royal storytelling, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex bringing something unique to a global streaming audience. And for a while, the numbers made sense. Then March 2026 arrived, and Netflix officially ended its partnership with Archewell Productions. No public drama, no announcement. Industry insiders described the internal mood in 4 words: we're done with them. Before that, Spotify, a multi-million-dollar podcast deal that was supposed to produce years of content. What it actually produced was 1 season. When the contract ended, Spotify executive Bill Simmons didn't send a polite farewell. He went on record and called them frauds. Not a disappointment, not a creative mismatch. Frauds. That word came from inside the building. Then in April 2026, Penguin Random House, the same publisher that turned Harry's memoir into a global bestseller and had every financial reason to stay in business with the Sussexes, let a reported $20 million book deal quietly expire without renewal. Sources described both sides as having burned the bridge, with the publisher specifically feeling financially burned by what had been delivered against what had been promised. Publishers do not enter 9-figure relationships without serious due diligence. They assess the platform, the track record, the commercial trajectory. By 2026, they had arrived at a completely different conclusion than the one they started with. Add it all up, 100 million from Netflix, a multi-million Spotify deal, a 20 million book contract. Three of the biggest names in their respective industries all arriving at the same conclusion within months of each other. That is not a rough patch. That is not bad timing. That is a verdict. And every single one of those deals was built on the same foundation: the Sussex name, the royal identity, the Duchess brand. That was the selling point. That was what made the numbers make sense to begin with. Now let's talk about the story that Meghan had been telling long before any of those deals existed. Because before Netflix, before Spotify, before the royal wedding, there was an origin story, and it's one she told for 20 years. She was 11 years old. She saw a Procter and Gamble commercial that described women all over America as fighting greasy pots and pans, and she was outraged. So she wrote letters to Hillary Clinton, to P&G, to senators. And according to Meghan, it worked. P&G changed the commercial. Clinton personally wrote back. An 11-year-old girl changed corporate America. She told this story at the United Nations. She told it at the One Young World Summit. She told it in her Vanity Fair profile. She told it again in Colombia in 2024. For 2 decades, it was the absolute cornerstone of her public identity. The girl who saw injustice, picked up a pen, and won. There is one problem. Vanity Fair's own fact checkers went looking for the evidence. They went directly to P&G. They consulted advertising historians. What they found, or more precisely, what they could not find, was enough for them to pull the story from the article entirely. They could not verify it. They found no evidence that she ever received a personal reply from Hillary Clinton, no letter, no record, no confirmation from anyone at Clinton's office. And then her own father weighed in. In his 2020 documentary, Thomas Markle said on camera that Meghan was likely part of a letter writing campaign of sorts, and that the story about her single handedly changing the ad may have been a little embellished. A class assignment, not a lone activist, not a girl who changed corporate America, a student doing homework. What really tells you where things stood is what Meghan's own PR team did next. They hired journalists and specifically chose not to include the P&G story in the official press materials sent to media. Not because it had aged out, because it had become a liability. The people paid to protect her reputation had concluded that a story she had been telling publicly for 20 years was no longer safe to put in writing. If the very first story she ever told about herself publicly cannot survive a fact check, that raises a very uncomfortable question about everything that was built on top of it. Now, the staff numbers, because this part of the story is one I find genuinely hard to dismiss, and I think it deserves more attention than it usually gets. Meghan told Oprah she felt unsupported inside the institution. She positioned herself as someone the system failed to protect, and that narrative got a lot of traction. But here is the question it never quite answers. If Meghan was the one being mistreated, why did 18 people walk out of her operation between 2020 and 2026? 18 documented departures. 3 per year on average, not anonymous sources. People with names, with careers, with professional reputations they had every reason to protect. People who left anyway. Samantha Cohen spent 17 years working for the British royal family, one of the most experienced palace aides the institution had ever seen. She became Meghan's private secretary in 2018. The plan was for Cohen to stay 6 months, help Meghan settle in, and hand off to a permanent replacement. She stayed 18 months, not because she wanted to extend, but because they could not find anyone willing to take the job permanently. When a replacement was finally identified, the palace flew that person to Africa, specifically to shadow Cohen on a royal tour. That replacement quit while still in Africa before the tour was even finished. Cohen herself was one of 10 staff members formally interviewed by Buckingham Palace as part of an independent bullying investigation, a review privately funded by Queen Elizabeth herself. The findings were never made public. The changes that followed were implemented quietly. But the specific fact that a sitting monarch chose to fund an independent investigation into her own grandson's household is not a minor administrative detail. That is the kind of action that only happens when the people with the most information and the most to lose by acknowledging a problem have concluded that the problem is real enough to require an official response. And then there is the personal pattern because it mirrors the professional one almost exactly. There is now an entry in the Urban Dictionary for what happens to people who get close to Meghan Markle. The word is markled. It means to be completely abandoned by someone after you played a meaningful role in their life. The fact that a dictionary entry exists because the pattern is that recognizable, that consistent, that widely documented, that tells you something no single story could on its own. Naki Prettyelds and Meghan met at age 2. They grew up inseparable. Sleepovers, road trips, a European holiday at 15. Naki was Meghan's maid of honour at her first wedding to Trevor Engelson in 2011. She was there through the marriage, through the divorce, through 30 years of shared history. She was not invited to the royal wedding in 2018. No confrontation, no falling out, no final phone call. Just silence. The kind of silence that is actually harder to process than a direct ending because it doesn't give you anything to respond to. It just removes you. Cleanly, completely, without the courtesy of an explanation. When Naki eventually spoke to the press years later, she used the careful language of someone who had been thinking about it for a long time. She said Meghan was calculated, very calculated in the way she handled people and relationships, that she was strategic in how she cultivated circles of friends, and that once she decided you were no longer part of her life, she could be very cold. Jessica Mulroney styled Meghan for years, helped her navigate the media storm of the early Harry era. Was it the royal wedding? Was it the baby shower? Went on royal tours? Multiple sources described her as Meghan's most trusted confidant. Then in June 2020, Mulroney got into a public dispute with a black influencer. Meghan cut contact immediately. A source told Page Six that the controversy gave Meghan the excuse she was apparently waiting for to cut Mulroney off for good. 9 years ended the moment it became a liability. And Piers Morgan in 2016, Meghan followed him on social media. They exchanged messages. They met for a drink in London. That same evening, she met Harry at a party. Morgan described what happened next very simply. That was the last he ever heard from Meghan Markle. These are not people who betrayed her first and then spoke. They were left first, quietly, without explanation. And when they finally did speak, they used the language of people who were genuinely hurt and had spent a long time trying to make sense of something that didn't add up. Not people selling a story, people who had arrived at a conclusion they weren't looking for. And this is where everything connects because the personal pattern and the professional pattern point to exactly the same place. And that place has a legal name. The Sussex brand was never really about Meghan the actress or Meghan the activist or Meghan the girl who wrote a letter to P&G at 11 years old. It was about 2 words in front of her name. Duchess of Sussex. That is what opened every door. That is what made Netflix write a 9-figure check. That is what put her on the stage at the United Nations. Strip those 2 words away, officially, legally, permanently, and the commercial logic that justified every single one of those contracts doesn't just weaken. The flaw disappears. Harry was born a prince. He is the son of a king, the grandson of a queen. Whatever happens to his titles, he has a constitutional and historical place in the House of Windsor. He has a flaw. Meghan Rachel Markle is from Los Angeles. Her father was a lighting director. The title Duchess of Sussex was a courtesy title given through marriage by royal prerogative because she married the right man at the right time. It was never hers by birth. It was never hers by right. It was given. And what is given by royal prerogative can be removed exactly the same way. A source close to Prince William confirmed to the Daily Beast what happens when he becomes king. The quote was direct. There is no way King William will stand for this. The titles will simply be removed. A way will be found. That is not palace gossip. That is not a threat floated through unnamed sources. That is a confirmed position stated on the record by a named source close to the future king. And when that happens, when the letters patent is issued and the titles are removed officially and permanently, every business arrangement Meghan has entered into since 2020 faces a retroactive question. What did every business partner, every retailer, every investor actually sign up for? Did they enter agreements with Meghan Markle, the former actress, or with the Duchess of Sussex? An identity that by signed agreement was never supposed to be available for commercial use and which will at some point no longer exist legally? That question has no comfortable answer. And unlike a bad headline, it doesn't fade with the next news cycle. It compounds. Tom Bauer has written two books on this subject: Revenge in 2022 and Betrayal in 2026, with 80 sources across both. And across both publications, with Meghan's famously aggressive legal team working against him at every stage, Bauer has not faced a single successful legal challenge. Not one. For someone whose lawyers have a well documented track record of pursuing publications that print things she contests, that silence around Bauer's specific reporting is significant. It suggests the documents and sources he's working from are solid enough that a challenge would be more dangerous for the challenger than for the author. Remove the Duchess title and you remove the premise of everything. The jam can get a new label, the Instagram grid can be updated, but the paper trail doesn't change. The signed agreement doesn't change. The Netflix footage doesn't change. The 18 staff departures don't change. And if the P&G origin story, the very first thing Meghan ever told the world about herself, the cornerstone of the entire brand, couldn't survive a fact check at Vanity Fair and was described by her own father as a class assignment that got embellished over 20 years, then what does that say about everything stacked on top of it? The clock is running on the Sussex brand in a way that no product launch or Instagram strategy can stop. The title will come off, the agreement is on the official website, the violations are documented, and the legal process that follows doesn't need anyone's cooperation or consent to complete. It just needs William to become king.